I am.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our community update for faculty, our latest community update for faculty. It's been almost 2 weeks since we took our off-ramp from in-person learning, and it's been bumpy for students and faculty alike, and it has not solved all the problems as we know from the continuing alerts of clusters and the reports of what is happening off campus. In the Office of Faculty Governance, we began planning this update before the off-ramp was taken. But in response to the off-ramp, we've structured the agenda to speak to some of the most pressing issues right now: the budget, the student experience, and decisions around athletics. As the fall begins, we will move into our regular schedule of faculty executive committee meetings and faculty council meetings, as well as all of the other committee meetings that are committees that are a part of faculty governance. The Faculty Council will hold its first regular meeting on September 11th. And in addition, I'm beginning to plan, in conversation with others, an event that will live at the intersection of what the military calls an after-incident review and what hospitals call a mortality and morbidity conference. The working title for this event is Acknowledgement, Analysis, and Moving Toward Spring, a reconsideration of the roadmap to fall. A number of people have asked for some sort of public accounting of both the decisions that were made and the processes by which they were made. I believe that this event will allow for the institutional reflection necessary to understand what went wrong as well as what went right, who was not at the table, as Dr. Kia Caldwell's article this week highlights, who should have been at the table, and what might have been approached or done differently, given both the same constraints that we faced from the Board of Governors or what we might have chosen to do without those constraints. I believe a conversation like this will help us to better and best plan for spring. I want to say another word about the Board of Governors. As we now know from news reports, and as I know from my own interaction with President Hans at the Faculty Assembly meeting in August, the Board of Governors mandated a return to residential learning for all system campuses and was the ultimate decider about when and whether any individual campus could make changes to their submitted plans. A week or so ago, I was chatting with a colleague in the English department who described talking with her class about noticing who was not talking when reading a work of literature. Just as her class has probably been thinking about that idea since she put it to them, so have I. And if we go back through the last 6 months, we should note that with rare exceptions, the BOG was not talking, not taking responsibility, and not being clear about what constraints were or were not in place for our campus decision-making. That silence and our temptation to ignore their very big role in this situation speaks to their power. I also had occasion this week to speak with individuals about how the Board of Governors functioned in the past and how it was designed, as compared to how it is functioning now. We all know that it has become more politicized in recent years, and that is because of its structure. In the past, the legislature and the governor appointed members. The group was a mixed group between people who had strong political affiliations on both sides of the aisle and those that considered themselves apolitical. This structure was purposeful so that the BOG would not become a place of political strategy, but rather the focus would be on the well-being of the UNC system and its individual campuses. This is not the world we live in now. I don't know how the BOG sees their role because they are silent. As a campus community, we have to recognize that the constraints imposed by the BOG and structure the choices that we have before us. Now, on to today's agenda. Before I turn it over to the Chancellor and the Provost for updates and a discussion of the budget, I quickly want to call your attention to this website that is on your screen. In the spring, A student care hub was created in response to the pandemic, and faculty voiced the need for something similar. Erin Malloy in the Center of Faculty Excellence led this effort together with a representative committee and an exceedingly dedicated and creative staff. This faculty care hub is the result. It will be housed on the faculty governance website and will grow and be updated as circumstances dictate. I want to thank Erin and Ron Strauss and their team for their work and championship of this effort. Finally, a note about today's process. As we've held these meetings over the summer, we've been learning what works best and most efficiently for these large group Zoom meetings. Please put questions in the question and answer section. The chat function is on, but we will not be monitoring it. So if your question goes into the chat, we won't see it and can't answer it. As I've done in the last several meetings, I will be drawing questions in from the question and answer section of Zoom. And if I can tell who asks them, I will credit that particular person for the question. What we have learned is that if we go to individuals and ask them to ask their questions live, we run into the technology difficulties of people being on mute, people's videos freezing, things like that. So we don't get to as many questions. So that is why I'm monitoring it and facilitating the meeting in this way. This choice has trade-offs, and I recognize that, but I think it is the best that we can do for the time being, and I appreciate your participation in this way. And with those comments, I will turn it over to the Chancellor.
Thank you, Mimi. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you for bringing us together today to provide an update on where we are as a campus as we begin soon. We'll start on Monday, our 4th week of the semester. As faculty of the nation's first public university, we are guided in all that we do by a deep sense of calling, and we're passionate about our mission to serve the people of the state through our world-class teaching, research, and service for our students, by our faculty, and with our incredible staff. In doing this, there's no substitute for being here on campus together, and this is a goal that we've had since March. As a leading global public research university, we have an obligation to carry out our mission, even when there's uncertainty. And we've had to balance competing ideas and priorities because we're a diverse community. The needs of a student coming from rural North Carolina may be different from those of a student coming from Charlotte or Raleigh or the Bay Area. But at Carolina, we figure out how to meet those unique needs of our students. And I think that's one of the things that makes us special, that makes Carolina special. In carrying out our mission of service, we have listened to a broad constituency and have done everything in our power to be prepared to adapt and make data-based decisions. In July, when we saw the path of the virus, we initiated a further dedensification of our residence halls and offered more remote course options. We prioritized flexibility and choice. No one had to come to campus if they didn't want to, yet many expressed a desire to be back, and we allowed them to return if they could. We truly believed in the residential campus experience and believed that it was possible, and it wasn't something to give up lightly. It was important for many of you, our faculty and staff, and for most of our students. We knew that not everyone agreed with this, but we had to try. The UNC system made it clear that we were going to try to all open together. I made it clear that we needed local autonomy to adjust our plan as needed, and that we would use data to make any decisions to modify our plan as necessary, and that safety and the well-being of our campus community would be first and foremost. Our plan was guided and will continue to be guided by our faculty experts in infectious disease and public health. We were just on a call this morning, continuing to work alongside them with our leadership team here, in collaboration though with the Orange County Health Department and the Department of Health and Human Services. They have been important partners over these past several weeks. I'm sorry that we had to take an off-ramp so early in the semester, and I'm even more sorry that so many people are disappointed, especially those who worked so hard to make an on-campus experience a success. Both those who worked to make it possible and those students who came and who did follow our community standards. And we're all left wondering what we could have done differently. We are putting measures in place to learn from our experiences over the past several months. And Mimi, you and I spoke about this just the other day about how we could work together on this. And so I'm pleased that you want to put forward a plan to do this. Bob Lewin and I have spoken with many of you, faculty at all levels, and regularly Mimi with you over these past few months, with our student advisory committee, with other student leaders, with Shana Hill and our employee forum, with our board of trustees members, and with leaders at the system office to reflect on what's transpired over these past couple of weeks so that we can learn from it. Our leadership team will continue to engage as many people as possible in this process of reflection and contingency planning. Just as we were prepared to take a pivot this semester, we're going to need options as we plan for the rest of this academic year and beyond. Across campus, as we talked about on the last two meetings that we've had, most students followed the community standards, and I enjoyed, like many of you did, talking with students, faculty, and staff, mask to mask, in the weeks leading up to the semester and during these first 2 to 3 weeks of the semester. But it wasn't universal, especially off campus, as we learned. And with this virus, being diligent, regardless of where you are, is paramount. And we have tried over and over and over to emphasize this. It was a difficult decision to bring students back in person, and it was a difficult decision to take undergraduate instruction entirely remote when we did that announcing that on the 17th of August, and to further dedensify our residence halls. But it was the right decision based on the data that we had at that time. So our focus now is to make sure that we continue to deliver quality instruction while carrying out our game-changing research despite these extraordinary circumstances, and to do everything possible to keep our students, faculty, and staff safe as there's still university-related activity and living on our campus or near our campus. We have to continue to work with the town of Chapel Hill, and we have had many conversations and meetings over these past few weeks, and we're committed to keeping a strong relationship with the town. We have to always know that the town is an asset to the university, and the town views the university an asset to the town. I met with housekeepers again last Friday to express our gratitude for all that they do to hear their needs and to reassure them of our commitment to their health and well-being. But back to our students, we must support them so they can have a quality Carolina experience this semester. I enjoyed meeting just yesterday with the Student Advisory Committee to the Chancellor and hearing their optimism and acceptance of the changes that they've endured over these past 6 months. This isn't just something that's occurred in this acute period of 3 to 4 weeks, but they have been challenged by this since mid-March. And I'll be meeting again later today with these student leaders to hear the needs of students, broadly speaking, as we continue discussions about what campus resources should remain available. CAPS, our counseling and psychological services, and campus health are working tirelessly to ensure students have the resources they need for their mental health and physical well-being, even remotely. We'll hear a little later, I believe, from Dr. Obar and Ken Pittman. I just want to thank them for all their incredible work over these past several weeks down at Campus Health. They've done an incredible job. There's so many people across campus who are leading the way in developing new curriculum and innovative ideas to expand our footprint and reach students through remote learning. The Carolina Way program, which we built out in the late spring and early summer, is working well. I talked with Rudy Colorado Mansfield just the other day, who's leading that effort. Thanks to those of you who are teaching in this program to nearly 700 new Carolina students and keeping them connected through learning communities and our uniquely Carolina COVID-19 investigation courses. Thanks to Student Affairs, which is bringing Carolina to our students remotely. Just learned this morning on our call that there's 281 different student engagement events that students have registered for, which will connect them to academic and extracurricular opportunities in unique ways, regardless of where they're located across the country or across the globe. And thanks to the Kenan Flagler Business School leaders and faculty who created a new MBA track for recent baccalaureate graduates with a wide array of academic backgrounds, but with limited to no work experience in the midst of this challenging job market. So we should all be thinking about unique curricular and extracurricular opportunities like these that can differentiate us and help us meet our mission to serve the needs of the state from these and for our students to ensure that we emerge from these challenging times even stronger with opportunities to help set to help offset the competing budgetary constraints that we face. And I'm going to talk about that right now. In talking with Mimi this week, I know that there are a lot of questions about budget. Many of you have concerns about the budget. I want to share with you what we know. Since our shift in operations this past March, we've made it clear that there will be financial impact to our university. All of higher education is facing financial hardship because of the pandemic, and we are no different. But we've been working hard to mitigate likely budgetary shortfalls and preparing for a range of potential scenarios, including this possible outcome for fall instruction that we just had with a pivot. We've been preparing for this since the spring. The total impact from the beginning of the pandemic until now is estimated to exceed $100 million. The offsets, however, which have been developed through restrictions and cost-saving measures that we've put in place, have helped mitigate some of that impact. But we estimate another likely $55 million hit this semester due to housing and dining revenue losses. There are still unknowns about athletics and other revenue streams. But make no mistake, this impact will be felt by all of us. But I'm optimistic that we'll work through it together. And the good news is that enrollment has been unaffected to this point. I just spoke with Steve Farmer yesterday. He confirmed that our enrollment remains up. We brought in the largest first-year class in the history of our university. And credit hours right now are for this semester up approximately 10%. So there is good news, and that will help manage some of the budgetary challenges. As you know, we also benefit from an incredibly successful research enterprise, thanks to those of you who help carry out this important work and help Carolina bring in research funding exceeding $1 billion annually. And this certainly helps during some of these challenging times. We're also fortunate that we did not receive cuts this year to our state appropriation, but we know that our state government has to make tough decisions for next year, and we need to be prepared to respond. We just began unit budget meetings, which had been scheduled months ago, and we began these last week, where we're working alongside our deans, center directors, and their respective unit financial leaders to prepare solutions for mitigating these budgetary challenges. And most of you already know we're filling very few position vacancies, and we'll have limited opportunities for salary adjustments this year. And those were measures that we put in place, fortunately, back in March and early April. We must prepare because there is the potential for new losses as the virus continues to hamper our on-campus operations. And we've been consistent in messaging this over the past several months. And our financial risk likely will continue. Federal COVID relief funding has helped to offset some of the expenses and needs associated with the pandemic, but we cannot be sure that there will be additional funding. We're optimistic that there will be, but we have to prepare as if there may not be. and we'll need to use central funding to help cover some of these expenses. So we're trying to balance keeping everyone safe with keeping everyone whole, but we will be faced with difficult decisions in the coming months. And as we talked about yesterday in one of our meetings, as the people's university, we have to live like the people of North Carolina. We have to make tough financial decisions, and we're no different than the rest of our state. I recognize also that the disparities of our students, staff, and faculty are what they're feeling because of this pandemic. And I'll fight for all of our faculty and staff to do my best to ensure that decisions are made as equitably and fairly as possible with more people at the table. In these situations, it's always the most vulnerable who are at risk, and they're at the top of my mind. Nate Knuffman, our interim vice chancellor for finance and operations, is with us on the call, and he can help and answer any additional questions we may have. But I also know, as Mimi asked the other day, if we could say a little bit about athletics and the plans for the fall sports season. The ACC presidents and chancellors met just yesterday to continue our discussions about the fall competition. Our fall Olympic sports, and Bubba Cunningham's also with us, and he can provide more details. But as it stands today, our fall Olympic sports can continue playing, but there are some challenges given the limited or potentially no championships that the NCAA will provide for those Olympic sports. And so Bubba can share more about that, but the NCAA has decided to grant an additional year of eligibility for these athletes. And so there's more decisions to come on that regarding how we'll handle that locally. But with regard to football, the current plan is still to play a reduced fall schedule beginning the week of September 12th. That was a plan that was announced about a month ago, maybe 5 weeks ago. But we are continuing to discuss the safety and well-being of our student athletes. And I expect if there is a change to this plan, that it'll likely happen within the next week. And assuming that we are still playing, we are announcing that we will have no fans in our stadiums at Carolina for at least the month of September. This is a necessary step that we're taking to keep our community safe. And so, as I said, Bubba's with us, and when we're finished here, he can provide additional information, elaborate on any of these. But these are difficult decisions because our student athletes have worked very hard to stay conditioned and healthy, and the opportunity to practice and compete in addition to receiving an outstanding education at Carolina is a major part of their being here. And we've been taking a lot of time to weigh all of the competing interests and that are associated with playing versus postponing. And I know that every university across the country is also working hard at coming to the right decision on this. Finally, I just want to take a moment to say that we have to remain committed as a university to fighting against racial injustice in all forms. And sadly, we witnessed more unrest across the country again this past week. And I just want to thank Sibby Anderson Tompkins for her continued work on these critical issues of diversity and inclusion. And I know that she's brought a lot of people to the table for these conversations. And Bob Lewin and I have been visiting with members of those committees and groups, and staying true to our Carolina Next strategic plan with building our community together. And I want to thank our deans who are working tirelessly to try to do everything possible to diversify our faculty. Just yesterday, as I got home, got a note from Dean Martin Brinkley from our law school saying that there was great news of the recent hiring, and one of them just 2 days ago, incredible hires, both African-American members that will be joining our faculty. We saw Medea James joining us from the University of Miami, where she's currently the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Ifo Ma Junawa, Associate Professor in Law, Labor and Relations and History at Cornell University. Both will be joining our faculty soon. And we also hope that Dean Susan King will be able to soon make an important announcement about a national scholar and an investigative journalist known for her coverage of civil rights in the U.S. To the Hussman School. And And Terry Rhodes, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, making great progress on hiring of faculty in a pre-COVID commitment that was made for scholars in U.S. slavery. So we are committed to this, and I want to work alongside our deans, as I know Bob Lewin does, to do everything to be a leader in this space. So as I wrap up here, I know I've said a lot, but I think this is important to sort of know where we are, how we can learn from from these past several months, but also look to the future. I think the worst possible outcome of this semester is that we lose faith and hope in our community. We need one another as we continue to face these challenges. From day one, I've worked to be as transparent and collaborative as possible, and I know that I can always do more, and I will keep trying to make sure everyone in our community feels heard and that they belong. I want to again thank each one of our faculty and staff for your efforts in this difficult time, and thank you for being flexible, for moving quickly, and for the empathy that you've shown our students. And thank you for continuing to serve this great university and our mission, as I started off talking about the mission of this university. So I'm going to, I guess, turn it back to Mimi or to Bob Lewin. Mimi, it's your call, and then we'll take some questions.
I just want to, I think I'll try and interweave a few questions that relate specifically to some of the things that you've said, Kevin, first, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
So first of all, we had a question come in before from Professor McGee in art history, asking about the plans that were put forward when the BOG asked for budget planning documents. And I think that there were 3 plans put forward at that point. And one of them related to if we were able to get through a fall semester, what a budget might look like. And then there were 2 other plans. And she is asking which plan of those 3 are we operating under at this point? And can you tell us more about the details of those plans for people that don't know?
Sure. So this is probably where I'm going to turn to Nate Knuffman to help. But again, as we talked about those plans back, I think at our last faculty conversation, that those plans were based on enrollment, not revenue, and that the worst case scenario that we were looking at, I think at that time was in the neighborhood of 6 to 8, maybe 10%. But again, we knew all along that our enrollment numbers, as I just described earlier, remain high, and so that's the good news there. Most of the revenue losses that we're going to see is going to be in our auxiliaries, housing, dining, parking. I've already mentioned some of the challenges that we're, within athletics that we're going to have to work through. But Nate, Nate Knuffman's with us. Can you elaborate? You were helped develop that plan.
Sure. The system office request looked at a range of options, and as Kevin mentioned, those primarily focused on revenue or on enrollment impacts. So that wasn't, the percentages referenced were not in reference to revenue. The revenue impacts ranged from 0% to somewhere around, as Kevin mentioned, 16 to 17%. The scenario most closely aligned with what's happened, it was somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And it's important to note, there were some differences about the revenue assumptions in what the system office provided to us and our own accounting for where and what the impacts are on the campus. And we've been doing a lot of work translating some of those high level planning to a more detailed plan, looking at this moving forward at the campus level. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think maybe at this point we'll go to Bob and for comments about, and maybe Bob, if you could address in particular the sort of the academic choices that have been made. There was a pause. Some questions are coming in about the sort of the planning for the off-ramp that took place, and in hindsight, perhaps, could there have been more planning for the off ramp, because it did seem a bit chaotic?
First of all, thank you, Mimi, and want to thank Kevin for his comments as well. The decision was made to take a pause. You're right about that, and I think the main motivation for doing that was to give all of us, particularly our students, a breather. And I think particularly once the decision was made to switch to remote only in terms of a major form of instruction, and to further reduce the density of students in the dorms, then I think it was probably in everyone's best interest to think about a pause at that time. And so that was the basis and the rationale for the 2 days that we took off, Monday and Tuesday, to allow students to transition from their current living situation to a new circumstance, and also to begin to enable them to prepare, as well as our faculty, for a remote only instruction. So I think that was welcomed by most all of our community. We also made a decision, and that was announced yesterday, to return to a form of a pass-fail option for our students going into the fall. That notice went out recently, and although that was I think well received by faculty and students, it's not a plan that necessarily everyone agrees 100% with, but I think it does get us to a very good place, and enables our students, to have multiple options, particularly as they enter into another semester of uncertainty. In terms of maybe before I get into the comment or the question, Mimi, that you directly asked with regards to the off-ramp, if I could just make a few comments about where we are right now on a few things that might be of interest to the faculty and the community. Much of this information is on the dashboard, but just want to reiterate, we have been working very hard at reducing the density of the students living on campus. As of today, it looks like we will have approximately 1,000 students in residence on campus, and that does not count the 425 to 450 students on the Beatty Hill facility, which primarily is composed of graduate students. So we'll have a total population of about 1,500 students on our campus moving forward for the fall semester. And as I think all of you know, we've been working very closely with the Orange County Health Department, and also the State Health and Human Services, and their interest primarily in, as students were leaving campus, to make sure that we give them every possible opportunity to be tested, not only as a part of being in a dorm that might have had a cluster, but also being tested on their way home. So testing has ramped up considerably over the last week and a half, and that information is being shared on our dashboard. As campus density has been reduced, the number of students available to be tested has also been reduced. Some good news with regards to the positivity rating. We're now in the low teens. We're certainly anxious to get in the single digits here soon. And I think because of the size of this university and the size of the town of Chapel Hill, many of the positive numbers have adversely affected the positivity rate within the Chapel Hill community. So I know that our community is concerned about that as well. And we've also had considerable conversations with, again, Orange County Health Department and the state, with regards to off-campus activities. And we've been working very closely with the town and trying to do much more partnering with the town as we move forward, particularly in trying to prevent and or eliminate off-campus party type activities. that has been an important element of the COVID spread within our community. So those are some of the, I guess, factual information that I just want to make sure everybody has. In terms of the off-ramp, we spent a lot of time, thinking through and working on what an off-ramp, might look like. As the Chancellor mentioned, he worked particularly hard in working with the President's office and the system office. Once it became clear that the incident, the numbers, were climbing at a rate that was going to be very difficult for us to manage. I think the Chancellor worked very diligently to advocate very strongly and passionately to the President's office to push hard for an off-ramp. The timing of that decision and the coordination around that decision was somewhat challenged by the actual decision process itself. But I think we had a reasonably strong plan, for an off-ramp consideration. I think what we did not fully appreciate was the magnitude and the velocity. One thing that I think Mike Cohen has said repeatedly that has surprised a lot of the infectious disease people as well, and that is just the scope and the velocity, of the change. If you remember, going back to that period, the first week of class, we started on August the 10th. On Thursday, I think most people were observing, high compliance on campus, very high compliance in the classroom situation, in the research environment, as evidenced by the fact that there was not a single transmission within the classroom setting, as well as within the research setting, which I think we're all quite pleased to hear about that. And so as of late Thursday, I think we were all quite excited about the way things felt, on campus. But from Friday morning till Monday morning, things changed very rapidly. And that was the rationale for the Chancellor to make an aggressive plea to begin to contemplate, that off-ramp decision. And so we did factor in, we had a lot of conversations, and a lot of planning was taking place within housing, within campus health, as well as within the academic side to begin the pivot. But I think the velocity of the transmission was something that was difficult to deal with. So that would be my response to that. I wanted to echo some of the things that the Chancellor mentioned with regards, to where we are right now, but also to be thinking about working together and moving forward. With the decision to go remote, as the Chancellor mentioned, there are ramifications of that decision, and we certainly were anticipating those, and Nate and his team have been working very hard in doing a lot of forecasting in terms of what the ramifications might be financially. But make no mistake, that this is going to be a very difficult time financially, and these are going to be very difficult times for the state of North Carolina financially, and we will not be able to hide, I think, from the financial realities that the state is going to be experiencing. And so many of the financial ramifications that are going to take place this fall will be somewhat buffered by the national COVID CARES funding, as well as some of the residual balances, that we have within our system, particularly in housing and dining. But if this were to continue into the spring, which I think we all are anticipating that there will be some challenges, as we start thinking about the spring semester, those financial ramifications are going to even be further amplified. And so, as I think most of the people on this call might remember, the period at this university between 2008 and 2010, and I think for those of us who were there, who were trying to manage, the complexities of those budgets and the budget returns, to the state, this has the potential of being much worse than that. And so I just want to make sure that everyone is prepared mentally and also begin in terms of planning, that we begin to think about the financial ramifications of the situation that we're in. So I know that that may seem far away, but actually spring semester is not far away at all. And we all need to be thinking about the ramifications of this. There's a lot of work that's being done on this campus in the area of vaccine research, as well as in drug therapy research. We have some of the finest scientists, in this space. So we will be getting a very early look at what might be out there. But I think most of us are of the opinion, that whatever is going to take place from a research standpoint, as it relates to a vaccine or a treatment, it probably is not going to be much relief to us, for the spring semester. And so I think it is advisable that we take a realistic view and what that might look like for us financially, and then beyond, because there are other issues that might be facing us in the fiscal year 2021. So with that, I'll stop there and then see if anyone has any questions for either Kevin, myself, or want to open up for other comments.
Yeah, so there are a couple things, Bob, that I want to ask. This is a little bit of a sensitive question, but you've had a quote in the media that has been widely covered, and that is a quote in which you said that you would not apologize for trying. And that took place at our last community conversation, I believe. And I think that some faculty would like for you to sort of expand on that. How do you think about that now? I think, that was certainly something that you said in the moment in response to a question. How do you see that statement right now?
Well, Mimi, thank you for asking that. I have received a lot of questions about that comment. I would ask people to think about where we were in March and April and what the forecasts were back then. And when I talked about trying, it was a belief that I had back in March and April on behalf of our faculty and our staff and our community, as well as the citizens of North Carolina, that here we are, a great public research university. And it was, I think, all of our hopes that we would be able to bring this university back together and pursue its mission in its entirety in residence. And at the time, when we started working on the roadmap, it was projected that the summer was going to be a fairly safe, comfortable place to be in. And the predictions back then were that the viral load would be low and that the testing capacity would be high. And so, so when I talk about trying, I'm talking about the tremendous amount of effort that so many well-intended people pursued during that March, April, May, June, and even into July, trying our very best to put forward a plan that would enable this campus to potentially realize that desire to come back. Now, once it became apparent, to all of us, and let me just say that at that time, I think most of us realized, that the decision to launch was not going to be a decision that we probably would own solely by ourselves, but would be a partnership decision between university leadership, particularly the chancellor, and the system office, particularly the president and the board. And so, since that was sort of a somewhat of a foregone conclusion, then our mission at that time was to put our very best effort forward to try to make this work and to work safely. I always felt, and I think that we felt as a community, that the off-ramp decision was going to be ours, and that would be something that we could plan on taking if, in fact, the data changed and the information would have guided us to take on a different decision. As the positivity rate within the state, went up, and it became apparent that at the national level, that we were not going to have virus load on the downside, but rather still on the upside, then that, I think, changed a lot of things for, in terms of our thinking and our planning. And I think that was what prompted the chancellor to come forward with a proposal to maybe rethink, the launch decision. So that's what I meant, when I made that comment at the last meeting. And I feel that a lot of people worked really very hard to really attempt to make this thing work.
Okay. To something a bit more concrete, there are questions obviously about the spring semester, and we're wondering, as we all know, things are continuing to unfold. When will those decisions be made? I mean, as someone has put it in the chat, there are, or in the question and answer, chairs, deans are being asked to plan for the spring semester by assigning classrooms and things like that. And I guess everyone's wondering a bit about what kind of effort are we going to expend? Should we be expending that effort right now if we don't have any decisions? What is sort of the timetable for making decisions about the spring? And then, of course, there are all kinds of questions about how those decisions will be made. But if there is anything that you could tell us about kind of a timetable for your thinking. And also, I guess a big question is, do we know anything about what our constraints will be from the system office about spring decision-making?
So maybe let me start. So there are no decisions yet, obviously, about the spring. I mean, I know it's hard to believe that we are already about to start the fourth week of the fall semester, but I anticipate that those conversations will begin in the next few weeks. And I tried to highlight the many good things that are happening here right now, that from what we learned from March when we had to pivot, and the way that instruction improved, as I talked to a lot of faculty and students each week throughout the spring semester. We taught entirely remotely this summer, and faculty, again, I know many who had never taught remotely before became really good at it and more confident in doing it. And the feedback from students, was very positive. Now, there's still a lot more that we can do. I talked about the unique programs that are being developed right now. I think we need to accelerate, our online options, and because we very well may be in a similar situation for the spring. It could be that we have to start the spring semester a little bit later, and I've already talked with President Hans about some of that and what that might look like. Now, again, no decisions will be made, but I do believe those decisions will be made in collaboration with the system office and in a collaborative way alongside the other chancellors of the 17 system schools. But I remain optimistic that we will be able to plan appropriately for the spring, certainly based on what we've learned from this experience.
And maybe I can make a comment about the planning, and maybe since this has come up already in some of the comments, and I think something that you would like for us to talk about, and that is the roadmap implementation team, and will the planning process be different, for planning for the spring?
Yep.
Let me just take a minute and talk about the implementation team, and because there are a lot of misunderstandings about what that team was charged with doing. This was not a decision-making team. It was an operational team. And so much of the composition, of that group was really around issues like HR and facilities and those things that were requiring looking at protocols. And so it was not a particularly sexy team. I mean, in terms of the kind of work that we were doing, it was basically a lot of heavy lifting, and the planning was very much around operations and implementation and execution of those plans. And so the decision-making was done at a different level. So I just want to make sure that you and all the people on this call, really appreciate that team its focus was in operations and implementation and execution of those operations. And that team met, 2-3 hours a day, every day for almost three months. And so it was not an insignificant commitment of time and energy on anyone's part. It would have been very difficult to ask that of anyone, who is not necessary in terms of their core role in helping us either implement or execute some aspect of that plan. Now, I think moving forward, particularly given some of the criticism that we have received in that regard, there will be a similar need to plan, for various options. If we were to go forward with a return, or if we were to stay in a remote only mindset, we're going to need to have plans for multiple scenarios. Mm-hmm. And that's going to require a lot of time and energy and effort to do that. We very much feel, because of the concerns that we've heard from the community, to be more inclusive across the ranks of the community, and as well as having student and faculty, as well as administration represented in this process. I think we're only just beginning to, I guess, envision what that process might be, and who the right people might be from an operations standpoint, but that should be coming forward pretty soon. I hope that helps me.
It does help. And I know I've had conversations with both you and with Kevin about the need for more faculty input into those decisions. And it has been my impression, just letting the group know this, that you all have been very responsive to that, both in terms of planning for the spring, also in terms of budget considerations. So although we don't know the specifics yet, I do want to point out that those conversations have been happening, and that there's been responsivity to those requests. I want to turn our attention a little bit to, we do have a panel of students, and we have Amy Johnson, who has joined us, because we do, obviously, in addition to the students who are living on our campus, we have a lot of students who are still in our community, at the community of Chapel Hill, living and studying here. So student life is not a concern that has gone away. And we want to know, both from a student perspective, how students are coping with this change to remote learning, and for many of them, going home. And also how the off-campus activities that contributed to that rapid spread are being managed, both from a town and from a university perspective. So maybe, Amy, if we might start with you, and you could give us some thoughts about some of that, and then maybe we can go to our student panel.
Absolutely. Glad to join you, and thank you so much for having me today. As you may know, I just started my role at Carolina on August 3rd. So I am on, what is it, day 26 or something to that effect. And so started the year off with a bang. And I really appreciate that, in addition to all manner of things that we're dealing with, COVID and diversity, equity, inclusion, and otherwise, that we also, you managed to throw in a hurricane and an earthquake all during my very first month. So it's really been eventful, and I thank you for that. I did want to share just some perspectives, as Mimi said, from our student affairs team regarding what we've been engaged in, and certainly our work with students to ensure that they're supported and that we're working with them to address their needs. Since the pivot to remote undergraduate instruction and the dedensification of our campus, we have been engaged in a considerable university-wide communication effort to especially reinforce to students, but also to family members, our community standards, as well as to relay our encouragement to students that in that dedensification process, that if at all possible, we encourage them to return home if it was safe for them to do so, to also extend to students housing options if for whatever reason they needed to stay on campus, either due to academic reasons or reasons related to some personal hardship or other matter, that we would support students in doing that. As well as, I think has been alluded to here, significantly take an increase in our testing available to students and communicate to students what those wide-ranging options are. And then lastly, also to communicate important issues of quarantine and isolation, particularly with the recent guidance encouraging students, whether they remained on campus or if they went home, to self-quarantine for a period of about 14 days, just for their own safety and our community's safety across the state and beyond. So in terms of that, as I said, we have engaged in widespread communications. Just yesterday, we sent another email to all students communicating those important elements. We've sent specific communications to our Greek and off-campus students, communications to our current and former on-campus residents, and then also messages to our parents and family members to make sure that they were in the loop. They are in the loop, I should say, and can serve as an important resource to our students in this process. There's such an important partnership in this whole process. So I know folks are interested in our community standards and what we're doing there. Wanted to reaffirm that we, as I said, in addition to just the communication and the reiteration of our community standards, we do have a process to address potential violations or allegations of violations of our community standards. For those who aren't familiar, we have various codes of conduct here for students on campus. And in particular, the most robust one is the honor system process, with which many of you are familiar. This is a student-run process that has a lot of bells and whistles, significant due process embedded in it, and one that also, due to all of that, takes several weeks typically from start to finish to complete. In making a determination regarding how we responded to our community standards regarding COVID, we elected to do an administrative process to streamline that and ensure that we were able to respond much more timely to allegations, again, of potential violations of our community standards and resolve those cases for the health and safety of our students in the community. So unlike the multi-stage and really intensive student-run process that we have in the honor system, as an extension of their enrollment, as a contingent element of their enrollment, we have a much more abbreviated administrative process on the community standards, which involves an initial referral and notice to the student, an administrative meeting with a representative of our housing staff or our student conduct staff and their designees, I should say, and then an appropriate review process. Again, allowing us from start to finish to hopefully accomplish that in several days. I want to assure folks that we take all reports or all referrals of potential non-compliance of our community standards seriously. Anytime we have a student or student organization referred to our office for a violation, that report is identified, assessed, and addressed by our student affairs team. Following the review, the university response can take many forms, anything from a letter of warning and a more developmental approach for things at the very minor end. For example, a student forgetting to wear a mask in a public area of his or her residence hall, to something that may involve disenrollment for a far more egregious or multifaceted violation of our conduct rules. And that is, again, dependent on whether or not a determination can be made that a student has failed to comply with those standards. As folks may understand, we get wide-ranging reports into our offices, and often they are somewhat vague in nature. An individual will report that the night before they saw 40 students on a lawn of a house at approximately this block, all unmasked. and we don't have any names, we may not have a specific address, it makes it very difficult for us to follow up on those. And our primary source of those reports out in the community, as you may well understand, we're reliant on our Chapel Hill Police Department colleagues to submit to us reports that have some detail, and our UNC police also are working closely with them. We have engaged in a significant partnership to try to make sure that particularly we work with the town of Chapel Hill and our Chapel Hill PD to give us really robust and complete reports, which allow us then to follow up in a similarly robust and complete way. And to date, we have received approximately 353 of those reports, again, all of which have received and are somewhere in the process, have received a response from us in some way, and we will continue to follow up on those. So I did want to offer some detail regarding how we respond and the partnerships that are embedded in that process. Mimi, I know, as you may have mentioned, we have a great team of folks with us today, some administrators and a panel of students. So perhaps I will stop there, and I'm happy to introduce those folks as would be helpful so that we can move right into questions. You tell us what would be most useful.
Well, I think there are just a couple of things to follow up on that I think some folks would more like a little more specificity on. So on the one hand, there are faculty members that do feel strongly about students being held accountable for actions off campus. And it sounds like you're describing a lot of that process. You've described that a lot in the last few minutes. There are others that feel that many students did a really good job in trying to adhere to community standards, that they haven't really been adequately recognized for that. And still others that are sort of saying, in the spring, is there something more that we can do and think about in terms of providing the term that was used as harm reduction in terms of social gatherings, so that students can do what they do in a safer way. So that's sort of one set of questions. I think a number of us, and I'll speak for myself in particular here, have some questions about the Greek system and how it is being held accountable, and how the national organizations are being involved in this conversation, given that those are the people that in some ways have the most control over those groups and can, refuse to maintain their houses, and their charters could be pulled, and questions like that. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to address some of those issues.
Certainly, I'd be glad to start, and perhaps this would be a good opportunity to bring in some of my colleagues from student affairs as well to address within their own communities. So perhaps I'll deal with the last piece first. Unfortunately, my colleague, who is the Executive Director of Off-Campus Student Life and Community Partnerships, Aaron Bockenheimer, unfortunately had a pressing family matter and was unable to join us today. So I'll try to field this question in his stead, and again, then turn to my colleagues. We absolutely do work with our Greek communities and their related regional advisors and their national associations to ensure that as much as possible, we are all on the same page in terms of how we will approach and support students in those communities, and also ensure that we're sending very clear messages regarding our expectations of community standards. So as just one example, when I mentioned earlier that we had sent a very explicit communication to our Greek students, that included all of those parties, their regional advisors, their local affiliates here in the area, their house corporations, and also their national associations. And then the chancellor and the provost and I, approximately a little more than a week ago, went and personally spoke with the presidents of the Greek chapters at a risk management reduction training program that they came up with and facilitated on their own. And we just sort of tagged on at the end to again reiterate our concerns regarding the reports of noncompliance that we were seeing, but also our kudos to those folks for those organizations and individuals who are really working very hard, as we could see it, to try to ensure that we were all being consistent in reiterating these messages of safety and to field questions that they may have about ways that we can work together. As folks on the call may or may not know, nearly all of our chapters that have houses are in houses that are independently owned from the university. And this is, I think, what you were alluding to, Mimi, is that as a result, our ability to dictate the behavior that happens in those independently owned facilities is limited. And we rely in particular on our partnership with the Chapel Hill Police Department and the town of Chapel Hill in order to send a very clear message regarding not only sort of compliance with state and local ordinances, but also our university expectations. So I do feel confident that that absolutely is happening and that we are, again, sort of speaking as much as possible with one voice. It is an ongoing challenge. And as you may understand, and I would just reinforce, you know, each of these organizations has its own charter, its own national association, and there is some great variability in terms of how then we interact with those additional bodies. Some national associations keep in very close contact with us. And as a matter of fact, I was just corresponding with an officer in a national association last night who reiterated a message to me that they are very interested in getting clear guidance from us regarding how to handle the communication with the chapter and how to guide them. Others are more arm's length, and we try to work with those as well, but there is some variability in terms of the cooperation and the partnership that we have, and I think it's only responsible to sort of own that. In terms of how we're responding to student life and meeting the needs of students and continuing to sort of support and reinforce them, I think now might be a good time to bring in Director of Carolina Housing, Alan Blattner, and also our Director of Counseling and Psychological Services, Alan O'Barr. We only extended invitations to individuals named Alan today, apparently. But perhaps Alan Blattner, if you could speak from an on-campus housing perspective, how we're responding and what we can do again to reinforce and perhaps provide greater safety and support to our students.
Sure, thank you for the opportunity to do that. We spent the summer re-envisioning our developmental program for students, knowing that it was typically based in face-to-face, hall-style interaction, small groups, all the way up to large community celebrations, especially during the first 6 weeks of the semester. We knew that was not going to be this year's path and spent the summer, as I said, kind of re-envisioning that. We think many of those programs were effective. We had many students, as the off-ramp was announced, talking about the relationships they had formed, the importance of staying here, and the connections that they had already formed. My team since last Tuesday has been once again re-envisioning what that will look like in a further distance fashion with about 1,000 students remaining on campus, but also how can we continue to build on some of those relationships that were started during the first 3 weeks of the semester and really capitalize on those to continue and foster and grow that connection. And so I don't have an absolute plan for that yet, but I can assure you that that is top of mind for us. And not just in the social connections, but how were the study groups that were being formed, how can those be facilitated? How can the mental health that the other Alan can speak to in a moment, how can we continue to, to be mindful and responsive when we hear of issues in that space? We're thinking through all of that and feel confident that we're going to be able to land at a good place that is very supportive of our students.
Perfect.
Okay.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
I'm wondering if we might actually, before we bring in Alan O'Barr, maybe go to the students and hear from them about their needs and kind of where they are and how they're seeing things at the moment from their vantage point, knowing that there are probably a wide diversity of opinions on campus. Hopefully we'll hear some of that diversity represented now.
Yeah, absolutely. To get us started, perhaps I can just quickly introduce the students who I understand are on the call with us today. We have our graduate and professional student president, Ryan Collins, as well as our undergraduate student body president, Reeves Mosley. We are also joined by our student government chief of staff, Danny Bowen, our student government senior advisor, Dwayne Hamilton, Residence Hall Association President Kira Griffith, and then lastly, our Commission on Campus Equality and Student Equity President Lamar Richards. I know that Greer Webb, also from our Campus Equality and Student Equity Commission, was to join us today, and I believe he may not be on the call. If he is, please forgive me. But we have a terrific team of student leaders who I know can speak to that. So I don't know if maybe Ryan and Reeves want to take the lead.
Sure, absolutely. I appreciate you having us on today. I guess I could just say a few words and then hand it off either to Ryan or the other students on the call. But I just want to say good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having myself and these other student leaders in this meeting. I apologize for my camera. I'm currently in a slow Wi-Fi spot, so I have to turn it off. But I just want to speak briefly, and I really appreciate the work being done to accommodate and prioritize students in these difficult times as we transition into an online format for the semester. It's been difficult already, and I know myself, along with other student leaders on this call, have worked tirelessly to advocate for students concerning housing policies and refunds, dining refunds, grading changes, involvement opportunities, and mental health in general following this transition into the off-ramp, among other things. I've been in meetings with other student body presidents across the system as they are struggling to navigate these difficult circumstances and prioritize their students, staff, and faculty, as the Board of Governors has continued to disregard the unique concerns of each individual institution across the system. The Council of Student Body Presidents has also released a statement directed toward the Board of Governors with requests, including allowing institutions the discretion to shift to remote learning on their own based off the regional virus trends and the guidance of local health experts, provide tuition and fee flexibility at the institutional level, allowing for refunds or decreases in tuition and fees and other costs such as housing, dining, and transportation, and providing flexibility to adapt academic policies to remote learning through things like a withdrawal policy that will now count towards a student's limit and that will note the COVID-19 pandemic on the transcript, as well as a pass-fail policy that will allow students to count toward prerequisites as UNC Chapel Hill has done. I appreciate the work of Chancellor Guskowitz and his team and all they're doing and all you are doing to combat this difficult semester following the off-ramp, and I hope we can continue to listen to student advocates and activists in decision-making processes moving forward. That's all I have right now. I just wanted to kind of, say a few words in general, but as we have specific questions, I'd be glad to follow up. But thank you so much again, and I'll hand it off to either Ryan or Danny or DJ or Lamar or Kira. I appreciate it.
I'll go ahead and jump in from the graduate and professional student side. So again, Dr. Chapman, appreciate the opportunity to participate in these conversations throughout the summer. And I'll begin by, as I very often do in these spaces, just by reiterating that so many of the constituents that I represent, our graduate and professional students, do serve these dual roles as both students and employees at UNC. So we relate to many of the challenges that have been expressed here amongst faculty and staff, as well as the student experience. And even though the pivot that happened a couple of weeks ago, switching to online learning, was required only for undergraduates, many of us, to the extent that we were still in in-person classes, many programs have made that decision to go fully remote as well. So we're also dealing with that transition. I've been as always, I'm very impressed with the resilience of our graduate and professional students as we shift to online learning. But the reality, I think, is, and one of the consistent concerns I'm hearing about, is just the quality of that experience. And so I know our faculty work very hard to provide a very meaningful online experience and online instruction. But that is especially difficult for many of these programs that rely on experiential learning, on clinical activities, and other pedagogical techniques that simply can't be replicated in Zoom. I mean, I'm seeing that in my own courses as a law student, but I hear that from folks all over campus. And there's concerns about the implications that has for competitiveness as some of us prepare to go out to the job market in 4 months or so in my case, and other students or on down the road. I think in light of that, one of the biggest things that we're hearing concerns about, of course, is questions about tuition and fee adjustments in light of the shift to online instruction and lost access to campus resources. That's something that we have a lot of questions about. And frankly, as many of our students do remain on campus or proximal to campus because of either we live to make our lives here, we're not just here 10 months out of the year for school. There's concern about continued access to resources, whether that's the library, technology, food services and things like that as those adjustments start to get made. Of course, many of our students are facing financial concerns, continued financial constraints. There's concerns about loss of TA shifts or RA shifts, depending on what the budget cuts shake out. And here I'll note that many of the folks that I work with are also dealing with families and children and other obligations they have beyond just concerned about themselves. Obviously, the usual implications that go with mental health concerns and the stresses that go with that. And in light of that, as the Chancellor acknowledged at the top, there's a lot of particularly added stress and anxiety for our students of color in light of everything that continues to go on in the country. The events perpetuated this past weekend in Wisconsin and other parts of the country. So I think it's important that we continue to acknowledge the added stress that our students of color are facing. And then we've discussed obviously about I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I wonder if I might interrupt you just for a minute, because you brought up an important issue at the beginning, which is this question of fees and what fees will be refunded, what fees won't. And other folks are wondering about that as well. That's come up. And so I do want to ask our administrators to address that question. So I don't want it to get lost. So maybe we could break and have them address it and then come back to some of the concerns that you're outlining.
Sure.
Okay. Who would be the right person? Would that be Provost Bluen or?
Sure, Bob, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I guess what specifically, Mamie, would you like for me to focus on? There was a lot covered there.
Well, I think there were questions about, would fees be refunded to students for things that they can't use, athletics, the health center, student fees generally, above and beyond, housing and dining. So
I'm sorry. Okay. Perhaps Nate, if you want to, Nate Knuffman maybe is best.
Sure, Kevin. The question about refunds of tuition and fees, one thing to recognize is a constraint we have. The Board of Governors earlier passed a resolution providing that tuition and mandatory fees would not be changed depending on the mode of instruction. And so that is one constraint we have in this process. And those mandatory fees are athletics, student activities fee, our debt service fee, education and technology fees, and campus health. So that's that range of fees. I know in many of those services and areas, the campus has worked very hard to make sure that there is access to services even in this current environment. And I know that we will continue to do that. But that is a constraint I wanted to make folks aware of. As far as other fee areas like housing and dining, we are working very hard to refund those dollars as quickly as we can through our process. If there's any questions on specifics, I'd be happy to go into other detail.
Okay, thank you.
If I can just add one point to that, as we talked about on the 17th when we made our announcement, we are not, the university is not closed down. I mean, despite the shift to an entirely remote undergraduate model for instruction, we are still keeping libraries open, student unions, student stores. We've got dining halls are still available. We're looking at how to provide more access to graduate students. Ryan and I talked about this last week. So I just want to reemphasize that, our research enterprise continues to run strong. And so there's still a lot that's happening on campus.
And Mimi, I would just add one other thing that Ryan brought up, and that is support for experiential education components, particularly for the graduate students, but also for our undergraduate students. Mm-hmm. We have worked very closely with the individual schools and programs. And as far as I know, all formal requests that have come to my office to try to keep these programs open, that those have been approved. We've also been approving out-of-state travel for graduate students in particular, and even out-of-country travel where appropriate, for graduate students to continue to be able to facilitate their research. Many of them, these projects, these trips are very much linked to their thesis and their abilities to defend in a timely way.
Thank you. Ryan, I know I interrupted you and I apologize for that. I hope that there are other comments you would like to make before we go on, and maybe we could turn to Lamar next.
Sure, and it was a good interruption, so thank you for pausing to give consideration to that. I'll just say quickly, I think I'll reiterate the same matter that you had brought up earlier in terms of the strong desire amongst my constituents, and I think students in general, for greater involvement in and transparency in decision making as we continue through the fall semester and start thinking about the spring. I know the provost mentioned earlier the misconception around the role of the roadmap implementation team, and so I think the question there is, who are the decision makers and how do we ensure that faculty, staff, and students, in particular our minority constituencies, in light of a lot of the concerns around diversity and equity issues being taken into consideration with that, are being included in that. And there's a very strong sentiment out there that folks are not being listened to, and I don't personally believe that it's true that people aren't being listened to, but it's the question of, if input is being taken into consideration but a different decision is made, why is that decision being made, and what are the processes that are leading to that? So I'll wrap it up there because I've probably taken more than my share of time, but I appreciate the chance to be heard and be a part of these conversations.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Lamar, are you available to give us a perspective?
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Good morning, and thank you, Dr. Chapman, for extending the invitation for me to come to the event today. I don't have really much to say. I'll just say that the commission is, of course, currently concerned about the safety, health, and well-being of the permanent residents of Chapel Hill, especially, and the community members of Chapel Hill. We are also extremely concerned about the well-being, mental health, and academic willingness of our peers during such a challenging and disheartening time. Based on my interaction with my peers, I am seeing the need for Caroline to drastically increase the resources for students who are now in situations without adequate or effective support systems at home. A population of our students, a critical population of our students, are headed to low-income homes and to first-generation homes where support systems are not as concrete or hardly exist even. And I think that is the duty, and more so the charter of Caroline, to not just say all classes are remote or to give students a pass-fail option and expect that they will be okay at home, but to also ensure that they have the mental, academic, and financial support at home to continue engaging in academics at Caroline in a comprehensive way. I personally am also concerned about the status of our campus with such social and racially linked unrest among Caroline's most marginalized communities, and would love more information and to have more comprehensive and concrete answers on the ways in which the university plans to comprehensively and directly address the concerns of marginalized communities and communities of color who are really receiving the brunt of all these challenging decisions and all these what feel like rush decisions. We're being told they're not rush decisions. Of course, these are things we expected. We always thought that the off-ramp could happen eventually, but unfortunately, the decisions that have been made recently does not reflect that. And a lot of our communities of color and low-income communities are really paying the price. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that into the conversation. I wondered if we might bring in Alan at this moment, Alan Obar, to talk a little bit about mental health in particular. And then, Lamar, I want to come back to some of the issues that you are raising about communities of color in particular. Alan, are you available?
I was just muted, sorry. Hi, thank you for letting me speak. Regarding mental health, I just wanted everybody to know that CAPS is up and running and has been since the first social distancing. We were already prepared for HIPAA compliant Zoom at the time that we crossed over to remote learning. Throughout the summer and now into the fall, we've continued full online counseling group work, medication management, and have been working on increased outreach and increased social media presence to try to reach out to people as they struggle with isolation and anxiety and depression. Specifically regarding the racial unrest, CAPS has taken this very seriously and was allowed to hire 4 new Black therapists this year to be part of a multicultural health program to specifically address underserved populations and try to help with extra stresses there that they're going through.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful and really interesting. I didn't know that. That's terrific, because I think we can't underestimate what is happening for our students of color and also for our colleagues of color, you know, with the continued, I mean, it's just, you know, another day, another shooting, and it's really disheartening that this continues to happen. And so being sensitive as a community to that and recognizing that level of trauma that people are really experiencing on a regular basis is, I think, critical at this moment. Kevin and Bob, so Dr. Caldwell wrote a letter this week that focused on the need for more representation at the highest levels of decision-making on our campus. And I wondered if you all might take a moment to respond to that letter in any way.
Sure. So, you know, I think that, you know, we earlier in the summer, we received the racial equity roadmap that was put forward. And we had a few conversations around that. I know that CIBI got together with authors of the roadmap. Bob and I did as well. And we heard loud and clear that they want to have a stronger voice at, you know, in this decision making, and we are committed to that. We have connected them not only with CIBI but also with the Carolina Next coaches, both CIBI and Amy Locklear Hertel, for that first strategic initiative that I mentioned to build our community together, and to try to work together toward finding a way that that they see that we and not only see, but they know and feel that they're connected to the roadmap, to the roadmap for the university, the Carolina Next. And so we have some work to do there, and I'm committed to this. And I know that to Lamar's point earlier about what is the university's commitment to our students, our marginalized students, and I would just say that Lamar, I've enjoyed getting to know you and other students that are part of the commission. We've had conversations this summer, and we're one of the reasons going back to one of the other questions about why was it important to try to open this fall or to come back in person. And I'll tell you that there are a lot of differing opinions on this, and one of those reasons was that there were many marginalized students who felt that this is where they needed to be, where their parents felt they needed to be able to thrive and grow and have access to the resources that are here, similar to what Dr. Abar just mentioned, and that the isolation that last spring, the second half of the semester, took on their mental health toll, and we listened to that as well, and that was a part of it. I don't want to suggest that these were only our marginalized students who were experiencing this, but it was many of them that they felt they had the best resources right here for them to be able to thrive. And so that all went into the decision making. It was tough to look at look these students and parents in the eyes and to say, no, we're not going to try to bring students back and to have access to these resources. And as Bob mentioned earlier, we are going to still have about 1,500 students in our residence halls, a little over 1,000, I think, in of our undergraduates here in the main campus. And they will have access to the hardship cases that residence life is allowing to stay in the dorms will be sure that they have access to these resources. Those that are studying remotely will have access to remote sessions, as Dr. Abar mentioned, and to CAPS and Campus Health. So that's we're committed to this. And Bob, I don't know if you want to add anything to it, but I'm really impressed with the work that Sibby Anderson Tompkins has been able to make. She started in her role as interim chief diversity officer and special assistant to the chancellor and provost for diversity and inclusion back on February 24th. And it wasn't long after that that we entered this era of COVID. And she's done a tremendous job of trying to bring people together to provide support for our marginalized community members.
Mimi, the other part of your question to us with respects to Professor Caldwell's comments is around hiring at the upper level of university leadership. And I just want to assure you and people on this call that I've been working very closely with Ron Strauss, who sort of oversees the majority of our executive searches. These searches are very much encouraging and being directed towards having diverse candidate pools. We have, when we involve a search firm, we are looking for search firms that have experience explicitly in identifying and bringing forward diverse candidates to those searches. So I also have met with our deans and have challenged our deans as well. And as part of their annual reviews, I'm looking for them to demonstrate their commitment to diversity, particularly in the area of faculty and leadership hiring. So this is not a quick process as you might expect, but I think we as an institution have that commitment to diversify our leadership teams at the department level, at the school level, and at the university administration level.
And I'll just add one point, Mimi. I mean, we can always strive to be better in this regard, and we are committed to diversifying our, as I mentioned earlier in my comments, our faculty, but certainly our leadership team as well. And I'm proud of a number of hires that we have made to bring underrepresented members to our leadership team, and we probably have. I'd say we have probably more underrepresented individuals on our leadership team now than we have in quite a while, and we're proud of that. But we can do better, and we're committed to working to do that, just as Bob has just mentioned.
Okay. There was also an article in the Independent, I believe, or in the Indie Week, in which people in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion felt that they were not included in roadmap decisions. I'm wondering if that's something that we might address. Well,
Bob can talk to the way in which the council that City formed was engaged. And so, Sibby, again, one of the things that she did shortly after taking this role as Chief Diversity Officer was to form the Diversity and Inclusion Council, where there's representation across each school, and some of the vice deans for D&I, were engaged in this process. So, Bob, I don't know if you want to say more.
Well, I was just going to add that. After Sibby was named and was established, she was added to that committee. So I just wanted to let you know that Sibby was a member of that committee, although there was not a representative from that office, at the very beginning of that process, towards the middle, and certainly towards the latter half of that, Sibby was invited to participate, and she is a standing member of that committee.
Okay, so and that's something, as we move toward the spring, obviously, I think that's probably on the list of things to.
Dr. Chapman, can I ask a question? To the point Ryan made, just wanted some clarification here. I know that Provost has stated that the roadmap implementation team or task force and/or committee was not the individuals responsible for the decision making, and I think Ryan had want some clarification there. I'll second that. Just some more information on exactly who are the decision makers that are handing down the operational asks to that committee, and whether or not, I guess, D&I officials are a part of that group or team of people.
Yes. So the position that CIBI holds is a position that has a standing membership within the Provost Cabinet and also the Chancellor's Cabinet. Those are what I would view, at least, as the two critical decision-making bodies, within our university structure. And so the Provost Cabinet obviously is the team primarily represented by deans and provosts and some of our vice chancellors, including our vice provost for DE&I. And that is also the case with regards to the Chancellor's Cabinet. So that office has access to the highest level of decision making at this university.
Okay, thank you. So we're, in the interest of time, we have 3 other student representatives that have not been able to provide any perspective yet. So I want to make sure that we don't overlook them. Although many of these issues are really important and warrant more discussion for sure. And hopefully those discussions will happen in other places and at other moments. So just because we don't cover everything today in as much detail, we're getting issues on the table that need to be addressed. So I hope that everyone will bear with that process. So I know Kira is with us, the president of the Residence Hall Association. Kira, is there anything that you would like to bring to our attention?
Yes, Dr. Chapman, and thank you for having me today. I hope everyone is doing well, that your week has gone well. I think the other student leaders commented very eloquently about ongoing concerns that students have. So I really just want to direct my attention to the spring semester and just share that I hope that we take lessons learned from this time around and apply them for the spring semester. And particularly with our planning, I hope that there's more intentional inclusion of diverse voices and perspectives in the decision making. And in addition to that, I'll say that during this time, I think, many of us have acknowledged that a lot of students across campus and some students off campus were following the community standards. But we know that it takes only a few students to not abide by those standards for rapid transmission to occur. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind for the spring. And for many of the students that have returned to campus, like myself, we definitely acknowledge that while it was nice to be on campus and to return to the community, it's also to be acknowledged that it's been more disruptive, I believe, to have to pause the semester and have students go back home, not just for students that were on campus, but for the wider Carolina community. So I just want to share that piece, advocate for that, and thank all of you all for your hard work and your flexibility and resilience during this time. I know so much work was invested into trying to make this semester as smooth as possible, but as we know, the COVID-19 is very persistent virus. So just want to continue to keep those decisions in mind for the spring semester as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. We have Dwayne from Student Government and the Advisory Committee to the Chancellor, and Danny, the Student Government Chief of Staff. Do you all have things that you would like to bring to our attention?
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really grateful to be here. And I think one of the important questions that you brought up that has not been quite addressed yet is, how are students coping? And I feel like that question has a very nuanced answer as far as some students have an easier ability to cope when they have the resources available to them to cope, whether that's through their family or through the university. And then when it comes to other students, specifically BIPOC or Black and Brown students specifically, looking at how it is harder for them to cope. And with the addition of the university not being forthcoming or not having decided on spring semester, that creates a added difficulty to kind of discuss what students are planning on doing. And one specific population that I do want to bring up, because I belong to that population and kind of represent, or here to represent and advocate for the voices, are student staff, and specifically housing staff within the university. Trying to decide whether to stay on campus and have a stable means of income, but be exposed to the virus versus going home and potentially exposing your family members to the virus is a very difficult decision to navigate. And when students, staff have no kind of guarantees on employment, or as far as the timeline of what our employment could look like, whether we will be staffed until the end of students moving out this weekend or towards the end of the semester, it's very hard to make these decisions. And with the intersections of a bunch of different identities, it particularly impacts students of color, as we've been saying on this call. So it's very hard for students to cope when we have no information on decisions that need to be made, and specifically some decisions that are made that don't seem to reflect the most vulnerable populations. And there are multiple examples of that, but I don't want to be before you all long. But one example being the recent decision in as far as low pass in the passing fail system. Multiple students have addressed that kind of decision making, and recognizing that times are worse than they were in March, and recognizing that now is not the time to be making decisions or be making adjustments that are lesser than the decisions that were made in March, when situations were not as bad for a larger amount of students. And I definitely can get into those conversations a little bit more, but I do want to thank you all for giving me this time and this platform to speak. And I can also answer some other questions if Danny has nothing else to say.
Thank you, Dwayne. As I understand that decision about the pass and the low pass, part of that was to make sure that students were not advancing to courses that they really weren't prepared for. And I know that there was, there were strong feelings from various corners, and that this sort of represented a middle path. So I hear that concern. And hopefully that will be something where instructors will be able to have, they obviously have a lot of leeway in how they choose to use that option. And people, I think, are trying to be very compassionate in their work with students.
Mimi, I'm wondering if Terry Rhodes, I know, was very involved with this, and she's on the panelist.
Oh, great. Yeah.
She's a panelist. She might be able to say just a little more about that. She put a lot of time and effort into that over the past few days.
Great. Terry, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for that opportunity. And yes, in the past 7 to 10 days, we have had many, many conversations with students. In fact, a number of you here on the call, and representative students, but also with our faculty, with our chairs, to discuss this change. I do think it was clear that there was concern about making sure that students were moving from foundational courses into the next step, and wanting to be sure that we were not in any way setting up a situation where there would be failure because of, we wanted to make sure that the students really were prepared for the next steps. We were also concerned about, and we heard this from our deans and professional schools, that there were concerns about future ramifications, which all students might not have been thinking of. And in fact, that's why in this latest announcement, we did ask that students really keep in mind the mentors and advisors to whom they could turn, as well as peer colleagues, other students, to discuss this decision before they made it with regard to pass-fail. So, I mean, it is more of a middle ground. We were hoping to move back to regular grading. I agree, Dwayne, that this has been a much more disruptive semester than we would have thought it would have been. But we're hoping that this option, and it is an option, students can also do the letter grading, will help them in what has become an extremely disruptive period.
Thank you. Danny, we want to bring you into the conversation too. We don't want you to be left out. And then I think we probably need to turn to athletics.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think the things that my colleagues have said have covered most of the concerns that I've been hearing from students. I really want to reiterate about the spring making sure that going forward we have a realistic view of what's going to be possible, and being upfront and having more time to plan for it this time around. I also want to add that our student government committees, especially in the areas of affordability and academic affairs, have been doing a lot of work around this, and appreciate an open and transparent line of communication with administrators, as some people mentioned previously, and being able to see that the input we're providing is being taken into account when these decisions are made.
All right, Danny, thank you. And let's move. Bubba, are you with us? Do you want to tell us more about these decisions around athletics? And I'm sure you can anticipate some of the questions that are coming in about that, whether there are questions about student athletes being allowed to, or college athletes being allowed to remain in the dorms when others are asked to leave, the fairness of that, questions about the health of our college athletes, those sorts of things. So if you would join us and perhaps tell us about these decisions and what other decision-making forks in the road are coming our way.
Okay,
whatever
sure.
you can tell us.
Sure, thank you. And I do appreciate the opportunity to speak. And, Mimi, you started out with talking about the budget, the student athlete experience, and athletics. And I think we hit all three of them. And right now, probably the most important one to us is the student experience. I said student athlete, I meant student experience in total. But right now, Dr. Obar was talking about, our students were talking about, it's the mental health of students, and included in that is our student athletes, particularly our Black student athletes. The racial injustice and those social issues and social unrest that we have right now are really, really important to our student athletes. And between our coaches, I know Mac addressed this first thing yesterday morning. Roy addressed it with his staff and his team yesterday. Courtney Banghart and women's basketball has. But between those coaches, Dwight Hollier and Cricket Lane, they've done a terrific job in staying connected with our student athletes and ensuring that we hear what they're saying, that we see them, we understand the issues that they're going through. These are really, really difficult times for them. And the competition is important. The preparation is important. The sense of community that these teams provide each other is really important. So, I know it's a very difficult and challenging decision to allow student athletes to try to play. But when you talk about mental health and building a sense of community, there's nothing more important to these kids than the family relationships that they have built with their teammates and with their coaches. So I applaud the effort. Is it fair that they get to stay in the dorms? I do think they're a unique group on this campus. There's no question about it. We knew we were going to try to play competitively, and we do believe that the opportunity to play actually gives the students the most motivation to abide by the community standards. We brought students back in a phased approach, and we struggled early. We had a spike early. We shut it down. We brought them back. The university community came back, and we see the spike again. And quite frankly, we had a spike with some of our winter and spring sports. But the fall sports, the ones who have something at risk, competition, have been outstanding in the community standards. So I'm really proud of the way that they have reacted. We are following the guidance of the conference, probably primarily, the NCAA secondarily, because they don't have jurisdiction over college football. The conferences really dictate college football. But the NCAA has moved the fall championships for field hockey, volleyball, and the two soccers into the spring. So we're modifying our schedules in the fall for those teams for them to compete. We will be making some decisions, or the athletic directors will make some recommendations to the presidents and the chancellors, who will make those decisions next week if we continue. The problem is we're all living in uncertainty. We could stop everything today. That's the only definite thing we can do. Trying to play is something that we are continuing to do. We hope that the numbers continue to go in the positive direction. We do think it's important to give these students an opportunity to try to play. We have, Kevin announced earlier today that we're going to try to play with no fans. So there will be no fans at any of our venues this year. We have increased the testing. So once we get into competition, we'll be testing our student athletes 3 times a week. And it is our hope and belief that with that much testing, you can identify any trends very early. You'll theoretically have healthy students playing against healthy students, even if from a different campus. And if there's an outbreak, we can address it immediately. Dr. Sioka is on the line as well if there's additional questions about our testing protocols. But that's where we are with athletics, in my view. A couple other things I just want to mention. One is the budget. Our budget's going to take a beating this year. There's no question about it. Our budget is built on the revenue from football and basketball. There's about 100 students that play in those 2 sports, and they support the entire department. Television contracts, ticket sales, and we're not going to have ticket sales. So we do hope that we can have a television contract for football and basketball. The university has been really helpful in saying, look, we have our students here. We have our commitments here for this year. So we're going to have a very bad year in fiscal 21. We really need to focus on fiscal 22 and beyond. What does our sports offering look like in 22 and beyond? What are our commitments? And how are we going to repay the debt that we incurred this year? And so those are very significant challenges. We've had rising costs in scholarships. Certainly we've had rising costs in salaries, particularly for the 2 sports that are market driven, particularly football and basketball. And we have some facility costs. And so we have put together a budget working group to really look at 22 and beyond. And that working group includes the athletic staff, the Rams Club staff, the university budget office, university relations, Rams Club board members, and a handful of trustees because they also sit on the Rams Club board. And we think we can come back with a plan that will be very helpful to the university, but something the university can be proud of. I think we're very proud of the history and tradition of our athletic program. We're nationally known. We have an incredible women's program. 60% of our student body is female. We've won multiple national championships in our women's programs. And so what does that mix look like going forward? And that's something that we do need to address. So I'll stop there because I know I rambled a little bit, but I do appreciate the opportunity to be here. But please know that the opportunity to play is very important to our student athletes. And again, I just applaud the effort that we're making to make that happen.
Thank you, Bubba. And maybe this is a question for Dr. Sioka, but so we know there was a spike among the football team in the summer. What about other athletes currently? I mean, have there been other athletes that have been diagnosed with COVID-19?
Yes, we have, but I do think it would be better for Dr. Sioka to address it directly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Mimi, and thank you for having me. I think Bubba alluded to before, as we saw the students come back on campus, and that's when our winter and spring sports came back on campus, that we did see some cases among those teams as well. So we've had cases throughout multiple teams. And I think that sort of reflects what was going on with the student population as well.
Okay, so the idea that this was something that was taken care of in the summer after the initial spike is not necessarily accurate, that this is something.
So I think our fall sports that came in the summer, so we phased them in. We had that time period where we did have some increase in cases. So we did halt activities at that point and let things settle down and make sure that things were contained. And then since then, the fall sports have done relatively well. The fall sports, the football came in first, and then the rest of them came in during the mid-July. And then the rest of the sports came in August 3rd, 3rd through 10th with the rest of the student population. And so that's where we've seen the majority of the new cases among the athletes.
I see. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I think we will go now to maybe some more general questions, since all of our panelists have spoken and been attended to. One thing, and we have other folks here that are available to answer questions in their specific areas as well. So some of these came in to me before the meeting today. So I wanted to bring up the idea of whether Kevin and Bob, have you thought about expanding not just the individuals that are involved in the sort of decision-making team, but more kind of the type of experts that are coming to the table in addition to who you've had? I mean, you've certainly had great infectious disease folks, you've had all kinds of facilities experts. What are there experts that you feel like you need that you haven't tapped into yet?
A good question, Mimi. So we probably have on that team there's 10 to 12 individuals. And at the suggestion of a number of people, and in fact, some of these faculty meetings where we've talked about involving our, behavioralists, to sort of help us think about the way people will adhere to and modify their behaviors based on the current conditions. And we engaged some of them early on. I think we need to be sure we get them back to the table for sure as we think about the spring semester, because so that's certainly part of what didn't go as we had hoped it would have this semester. And we brought those that, ethicists to the table. We had some conversations with them just about how we're thinking through this. And we want to make sure that they are back at the table and probably at the beginning of the conversations as we look to the spring semester. Mm-hmm. And let me just say that there are so many different opinions around the testing. I know that everybody can, play Monday morning quarterback and think about what should we have done differently from the testing perspective. But I'll tell you that as I've talked to other, university presidents and chancellors, and Bob's talked to provosts, there are different ways, different approaches to this. And there are some universities that are doing the reentry testing that are finding that their rates are low during the initial few days, upon reentry, but they spike up, and that one point in time test was not as valuable as they would have liked to have been. There are some other places where they're saying no, that that entry test and then some serial tests beyond that over the first few weeks is making a difference. And so there's just a lot of different opinions about it, even amongst the group that we've pulled together. So we are going to look closely at what the composition of that committee, that working group looks like, and who should be there. And as I've already said, I think we need to engage more faculty, and we are committed to doing that, as I've told you, Mimi, and certainly members of our students and faculty from underrepresented groups. So we're going to do that.
Yeah, I would only add, Mimi, that throughout the whole past 4 to 6 months, we have brought in, people who have different expertise. The idea, at least initially, maybe it was not the best, but the original concept was, for that committee, to be fairly small and nimble, that would facilitate, because we really weren't sure at the time, how quickly a lot of these decisions, would have to be made. And the concept was that we would bring people into that group as needed, as their expertise would be valued, for that committee. And that took place, throughout the entire period. And even with regards to the concern about including faculty and students and students of color, we did have numerous conversations along the way. They weren't part of that committee, but there were opportunities for those groups to come in and to give their thoughts on particular areas of interest. The other is that I think we've all been learning. I was on a call yesterday with EAB, which is a national organization that supports universities, and particularly very helpful with regards to R1 universities. And we have been consulting them constantly. What are other universities doing? What are the best practices out there? Kevin and I are quizzing other universities, chancellors and provosts You know, what are you learning? You know, what are your concerns? You know, what issues are you facing? Are they ahead of us? Are they behind us? And we've been sort of helping each other. You know, in a very ironic way, you know, we're somewhat now being called upon by many universities around the country, actually in a fairly positive way, to seek our insight, you know, in terms of how they can adapt to their own off-ramp strategy. And so, you know, the other thing that I would just say is that you know, no one has a whole lot of experience in dealing with this kind of a pandemic, and I think there are many things that are still unknown with regards to the disease itself. You know, what is the sequelae of having a low end or a moderate infection? You know, are there consequences to that long term for the patient? And of course that comes into decision making with regards to what we might do in the spring. So we're trying to learn as much as we can, as fast as we can. We've been very fortunate to have outstanding talent on our campus, not only in infectious disease and public health, but also, as Kevin mentioned, in the behavioral modification area, as well as world-class ethicists, which we have routinely consulted.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I know, Bubba, there was something you wanted to clarify. Is that?
Yeah, thanks, Mimi. I'm sorry. I misspoke. I said that we weren't going to have fans this fall. The recommendation that we've made so far has been no fans in September. We'd like to see how the fall semester progresses from a state and local basis before we make that declaration for October and November. So I said the entire fall, but I was speaking of September.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. I think that this brings us to the end of our time. I want to thank the Chancellor and the Provost for staying an extra 30 minutes. They were scheduled to be with us till 11, and they made the decision to stay, so that's very helpful. We will all be, you know, as I said, I think there are some of what we've gotten into today and some of the questions that are coming in really are areas that I think this next experience where we might convene an after incident review to really think through and reflect on decisions that were made in the interest of creating a better path forward for the spring, will be a time for some of these questions that haven't been specifically answered here. One of those areas also concerns how we relate to our town partners. And, you know, we kind of hear mixed messages about this, that we have great relationships with them and that we're really close to them. Then we hear other messages that say we've really alienated them. So I think that's something, and we may want to bring them into that next conversation to get a better sense of that. And as we all know, all relationships are complicated, whether they are interpersonal or whether they are interinstitutional. And so I'm sure it's a mix of both. So I want to thank everyone that attended this meeting. I really want to thank our panelists. These community conversations have taken a lot of time this summer and this fall. I think they are critically important for increasing our dialogue. And so to everyone who participates and who watches through a live stream, we appreciate you being here and appreciate your participation. So thanks to all, and more to come.
Thanks, Mimi, and thanks to everyone for participating. And as I mentioned earlier, I just we're going to learn from this and continue to look toward the opportunities for spring semester and beyond. So I appreciate you convening this and look forward to participating in upcoming events with you.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Goodbye. Have a good weekend and a good week.